December 7, 1941, the date that transformed America from spectator to warrior. The sun rose that morning with particular brilliance over Oahu, casting the Pacific Fleet in hues that photographers dream about, deep blues merging into burnished gold, the battleships standing proud and serene like monuments to naval power. Church bells were scheduled to ring across the island. Sailors planned lazy Sunday mornings, breakfast with buddies, maybe a beach afternoon. The war in Europe seemed impossibly distant, a problem for other nations, other men. Then, at precisely 7:55 a.m., the sky tore open. The first wave of Japanese aircraft, 183 planes in total, screamed down from the clouds like mechanical vultures. Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bombers, Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers, and Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters carved through the peaceful Hawaiian morning with a sound that would echo through generations. Within seconds, the carefully ordered universe of the United States Pacific Fleet dissolved into a nightmare of explosions, screaming metal, and the distinctive crack of bombs finding their marks. Marine Gunnery Sergeant Tom Brewster wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the armory that morning. 20 years in the Corps had earned him a comfortable assignment, desk work mostly, training schedules and requisition forms. But 2 decades of service had also instilled something deeper than duty, an instinct that separated career warriors from men who merely wore the uniform. When the first explosions bloomed across Ford Island, painting the morning in shades of orange and black that nature never intended, Brewster didn't freeze. He didn't seek cover like the young Marines stumbling from barracks, their faces masks of confusion and terror. He ran toward the guns. The armory was chaos incarnate, Marines scrambling for weapons, officers shouting contradictory orders, the building itself shuddering with each nearby explosion. Brewster's hands moved with practiced efficiency, selecting a Springfield M1903 rifle from the rack, the wood and steel familiar as his own skin. The Lyman scope mounted above the bolt represented the pinnacle of 1941 military optics, a 5-power magnification system with a 3/4-inch objective lens. He'd qualified expert marksman with this exact setup more times than he could count, placing rounds within the 10 ring at 600 yards on the known distance ranges at Quantico. But Quantico's manicured firing ranges bore no resemblance to the hell unfolding outside. Brewster positioned himself behind a concrete barrier near the harbor's edge, his body automatically assuming the prone shooting position drilled into muscle memory through countless training cycles. Through the Lyman scope, he searched for targets among the smoke and chaos. Oil burning on the water created vertical columns of black smoke that twisted in the morning breeze. Ships were listing, some already showing the mortal wounds that would send them to the bottom. Men dotted the oil-slicked surface, white uniforms stark against the petroleum darkness, struggling, drowning, dying. And circling above them like a predator, a Japanese pilot in his Nakajima bomber, machine guns chattering, deliberately targeting the helpless survivors. 800 yards, maybe 850. Brewster's mind calculated automatically wind speed, target velocity, the mathematics of long-range shooting that separated expert marksmen from merely competent riflemen. Under normal circumstances, in controlled conditions with known distances and match-grade ammunition, this shot would stretch his abilities but remain within the realm of possibility. These were not normal circumstances. Through the 5-power magnification of his Lyman scope, the enemy aircraft appeared as little more than a dark silhouette against the smoke-choked sky. The pilot himself was invisible, a theoretical presence inside machinery that moved with deadly purpose through Brewster's limited field of view. The scope's reticle, designed for stationary paper targets on well-maintained ranges, seemed pathetically inadequate for tracking a moving aircraft whose speed and direction changed with each passing second. Breathe, lead the target. Account for windage, compensate for bullet drop at this distance. His finger found the trigger's familiar resistance point, that precise moment where another ounce of pressure would send 150 grains of copper-jacketed lead downrange at 2,800 feet per second. The Springfield bucked against his shoulder. The crack of the rifle was immediately swallowed by the larger symphony of destruction echoing across the harbor. Complete miss. Through the scope, Brewster watched his bullet pass harmlessly behind the aircraft. The pilot continued his deadly work, untouched, unreachable, untouchable at that distance. The machine guns kept chattering, stitching lines of death across water, where American sailors, boys really, most of them barely old enough to vote, fought for their lives against an enemy they could neither reach nor effectively engage. Brewster chambered another round, the spent casing ejecting with familiar mechanical precision. But the aircraft was banking away now, climbing toward altitude where small arms fire couldn't follow. 30 seconds of controlled breathing, perfect shooting form, textbook marksmanship technique, and absolutely zero effect on the battle unfolding around him. The lesson was bitter but clear. American equipment was not equal to the distances at which modern warfare was being fought. That realization, that moment of tactical clarity amid strategic catastrophe, would reverberate through the Marine Corps for the next 3 years. Young men were dying not because they lacked courage or training, but because they simply could not see far enough to fight back effectively. Pittsburgh, where precision meets desperation. 3 months later, winter held Pittsburgh in its gray grip. The steel mills continued their endless work, their smokestacks adding to the overcast sky that seemed to match the nation's mood. America was at war now, truly, completely, irreversibly at war. Young men lined up at recruitment offices, factories retooled for military production, and in a small optical shop on Liberty Avenue, wedged between a hardware store and a delicatessen, in a neighborhood where immigrant craftsmen had perfected their trades for generations, a German immigrant was about to change the face of American warfare. John Unertl Sr. didn't look like a revolutionary. 63 years old, with hands gnarled from decades of precision work and eyes that required reading glasses despite a lifetime of lens crafting, he appeared more grandfather than military innovator. His thick German accent marked him as foreign in a city where suspicion of anything German ran deep. After all, America was fighting Germany's allies, and old prejudices died hard. But when John Unertl examined precision optics, nationality disappeared. There was only the work, the glass, the mathematics of light bending through carefully shaped surfaces. Captain George O. Van Orton of the Marine Corps Equipment Board had traveled from Washington specifically to visit this modest shop. Van Orton himself was no ordinary officer, a competitive marksman who had claimed multiple championships at Camp Perry. He combined an engineer's analytical precision with a combat officer's practical wisdom. His office walls back in Washington displayed certificates and trophies spanning 2 decades of shooting excellence. But the reports crossing his desk told a very different story about American marksmanship capability under actual combat conditions. Casualty reports from Wake Island, after-action assessments from Bataan, preliminary intelligence from Guadalcanal. The pattern was unmistakable and deeply troubling. Japanese snipers consistently outranged American forces, picking off Marines from positions that existing equipment simply couldn't engage effectively. Van Orton laid the current standard-issue Lyman 5A scope on Unertl's workbench with something approaching reverence. This device represented the pinnacle of American military optics as it existed in early 1942, a reliable, rugged design that offered adequate performance under controlled conditions. 5-power magnification provided sufficient target resolution for known distance shooting up to 600 yards. The 3/4-inch objective lens gathered enough light for clear visibility during optimal conditions. The internal adjustment mechanisms were simple and robust, designed to withstand the rough handling military equipment inevitably received. But adequate was proving woefully insufficient for Pacific theater realities. Unertl examined the military scope with an optician's critical eye, his fingers tracing the mechanisms with professional assessment. He said nothing for a long moment, simply studying every aspect of the device's construction. Finally, he set it aside and reached beneath his workbench. What he placed before Van Orton was something entirely different. The Unertl scope, designed originally for civilian target shooting competitions, represented a quantum leap in optical performance. 8-power magnification instead of 5. A massive 1.5-inch objective lens that gathered nearly 4 times the light of military optics. Crystal clear glass ground to tolerances measured in fractions of wavelengths. External micrometer adjustment knobs that allowed precise corrections measured in quarter minutes of angle. "Captain," Unertl said in his thick accent, each word carefully pronounced, "this scope Voss never meant for VAR. I designed it for competitive shooters, for weekend matches where men compete for trophies, not lives." Van Orton pressed his eye to the eyepiece, and the world transformed. Through the Unertl scope, objects 1,000 yards distant appeared with impossible clarity. Individual leaves on distant trees stood out in sharp relief. The grain in wooden structures was visible at distances where existing equipment showed only blurred shapes. It was as if someone had moved the entire world several hundred yards closer. One question hung in the air between the two men, unspoken, but absolutely critical. Could this fragile civilian device, designed for calm competition ranges and careful handling, possibly survive the brutal realities of jungle warfare, amphibious assaults, and the corrosive environments of the Pacific Theater? The answer to that question would cost American lives before it was finally resolved. The bureaucratic battlefield. The rejection letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late spring 1942, delivered by courier with the bureaucratic efficiency that characterized military correspondence during wartime. Captain Van Orton read the terse paragraphs twice, his jaw tightening with each carefully worded denial. Colonel William Sterling's signature appeared at the bottom in bold ink, followed by the official seal that transformed recommendation into immutable policy. "Any new sniper rifle system will be based on the proven M1903 Springfield platform," the letter stated with absolute certainty. The Winchester Model 70 proposal lacks sufficient field testing under combat conditions to warrant adoption during ongoing operations. The Marine Corps does not change horses midstream, particularly when our current mounts have served reliably for decades. Van Orton crumpled the paper slightly, then smoothed it back out with deliberate care. The decision reflected institutional thinking that prioritized proven systems over innovative solutions, a conservative approach that valued reliability above performance improvements. In peacetime, such caution made perfect sense, but these weren't peacetime casualties stacking up in the Pacific. At Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, a 3-month evaluation program had generated data that told a completely different story. Marine armorers conducted exhaustive testing of both Winchester Model 70 and modified M1903 Springfield rifles, both platforms mounting John Unertl's revolutionary 8-power civilian scope. The numbers were remarkable by any standard of military accuracy, consistent 3.5-inch groups at 600 yards with match ammunition, sub-minute of angle precision that exceeded existing military specifications by significant margins. Master Sergeant Bill Harrison supervised much of the field testing with the skeptical eye of a range instructor who'd watched fancy equipment fail under actual use. 20 years of Marine service had taught him to distrust complicated mechanisms, particularly when maintained by 19-year-old Marines operating under combat conditions where proper cleaning procedures competed with immediate survival needs. "That contraption's got more moving parts than a pocket watch," Harrison muttered during a morning inspection, examining the scope's micrometer mechanisms with professional suspicion. Corporal James Mitchell from rural Kentucky nodded agreement while carefully cleaning the scope's objective lens. Mitchell's hunting background made him a natural candidate for sniper training, but his practical experience with simple, reliable equipment made him equally wary of the device's delicate appearance. Then came the rain. Weather during the testing period proved typical for coastal North Carolina, humid, unpredictable, and exceptionally hard on precision equipment. When rain began falling during a particularly important accuracy trial, both Harrison and Mitchell watched nervously as moisture accumulated on the scope's external surfaces. Within hours, the delicate adjustment mechanisms were binding, requiring careful cleaning and lubrication before normal function could be restored. Each failure was meticulously documented, each problem carefully noted in reports that traveled up the chain of command, and each negative assessment strengthened the institutional resistance to adopting civilian equipment for military use. Back in Pittsburgh, John Unertl Sr. received these detailed failure reports with the methodical attention of a craftsman who understood that perfection existed only in theory, never in the field conditions where his scopes would ultimately serve. Working 16-hour days in his small shop, he handcrafted modifications to address each documented problem. Grinding lenses by hand, machining components with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, testing, failing, modifying, testing again. Emma Unertel brought her husband coffee at midnight, finding him hunched over precision lathes that filled the workshop with the sound of cutting steel and the smell of machine oil. "The Marines, they need these to work perfectly," he explained in his thick accent, not looking up from his work. "Young men like our Hans," his voice caught slightly at the mention of their son, now training with the Marines somewhere in the Pacific. "They are depending on this equipment. I will not fail them, because I was not willing to work hard enough." The fragility problem emerged as the most serious obstacle to military adoption. During sustained field trials, the scope's mounting system proved problematic under repeated recoil stress. The long tube shifted minutely with each shot, requiring constant re-zeroing that negated much of the accuracy advantage the system provided. Humidity caused external adjustments to seize. Salt air corroded brass components. Coral dust, particularly on Pacific islands, abraded finishes and infiltrated mechanisms faster than field maintenance could address. Military evaluators documented every failure with professional thoroughness. One particularly damaging report stated bluntly, "Too fragile for sustained combat use, requires excessive maintenance under field conditions, not recommended for adoption." The words carried the authority of field experience and the weight of institutional responsibility for marine lives. But in the Pacific, casualties continued mounting with each amphibious assault. Guadalcanal, the price of inadequate equipment. The Solomon Islands campaign demonstrated everything wrong with existing American marksmanship equipment. On Guadalcanal, Marines found themselves fighting a sophisticated enemy who understood the tactical value of superior optics and longer engagement ranges. Japanese snipers, equipped with scoped Arisaka rifles and positioned in carefully prepared defensive positions, inflicted casualties at distances where American forces couldn't effectively respond. Lieutenant Robert Evans commanded a rifle company during the early fighting around Henderson Field. His after-action report, written in the matter-of-fact prose that characterized combat officers who'd seen too much death, painted a grim picture. Enemy snipers consistently engage our forces at ranges exceeding 800 yards. Our designated marksmen, despite excellent training and acceptable equipment by peacetime standards, are unable to locate or neutralize these threats. Yesterday we lost 3 squad leaders and a platoon sergeant to sniper fire. None of our return fire proved effective. The enemy positions were simply beyond our optical capabilities. Morale impact is significant. Marines feel helpless when they cannot fight back effectively. At Marine Corps headquarters, these reports accumulated in file folders that grew thicker with each week. Van Orton read every single one, his frustration building alongside his determination to find a solution. The mathematics were brutally simple. Every day that passed without improved optical equipment meant more American casualties from an enemy that understood the tactical advantage of seeing farther. The decision to proceed came not from confidence in the Unertel system, but from desperation born of mounting body counts. By late 1943, Marine commanders faced the grim mathematics of amphibious warfare. Every major assault resulted in thousands of American casualties. Many, perhaps most, were inflicted by enemy snipers and machine gun crews, operating at ranges where existing American equipment couldn't effectively respond. The strategic imperative to maintain offensive momentum against Japanese island fortifications demanded solutions, even imperfect ones that carried significant operational risks. Van Orton received authorization to move forward with limited procurement, though the conditions attached reflected institutional skepticism about the Unertel system's battlefield viability. Each scope would be issued with detailed maintenance protocols developed specifically for high humidity environments. Special carrying cases made from moisture-resistant materials would protect the delicate mechanisms during transport. Most critically, the scopes would be mounted exclusively on M1903A1 National Match rifles, precision weapons whose inherent accuracy could maximize whatever advantages the optical system provided. John Unertl understood this represented his last opportunity to prove civilian precision. Engineering could serve military needs effectively. The production target of 2,800 scopes represented a massive undertaking for a small optical company that had previously focused on target shooting equipment. Emma managed the business expansion with quiet efficiency, hiring additional craftsmen, organizing production schedules that balanced her husband's perfectionist tendencies with military delivery requirements. Each scope required dozens of precision-machined components and hours of hand assembly by skilled technicians who understood their work would be tested under conditions where failure meant American casualties. The M11903A1 rifle selected for the sniper program underwent extensive modification. Marine armorers at the Philadelphia Navy Yard developed specialized procedures for installing the mounting blocks, machining each rifle's receiver to precise tolerances. The polished bolts characteristic of national match rifles were carefully blued to eliminate reflective surfaces that might betray a sniper's position. Trigger mechanisms were adjusted to provide crisp, consistent releases that complemented the optical system's precision capabilities. Corporal Mitchell gets his rifle. Corporal James Mitchell received his assigned rifle in early 1944 while training with the 4th Marine Division at Camp Pendleton, California. Serial number 1464 bore the markings of Springfield Armory and the careful finishing that distinguished national match weapons from standard infantry rifles. The Unertl scope, mounted above the action, represented the culmination of months of development work. During his first range session with the new equipment, he placed 5 rounds into a 4-inch group at 600 yards, precision that would have been impossible with standard equipment. "This thing makes me feel like I'm cheating," Mitchell wrote home to Kentucky. "I can see individual buttons on targets at distances where our old scopes showed nothing but blurred shapes. If this works half as well in combat as it does on the range, the Japanese are in for a very bad time." The training regimen developed for the Unertl system emphasized maintenance procedures as much as marksmanship technique. Marines learned to disassemble and clean the scope's external mechanisms using specialized tools. Moisture protection became a critical skill, with detailed instruction in the proper use of protective covers and desiccant materials that could prevent the humidity-related failures that had plagued earlier trials. Each sniper was required to demonstrate proficiency in scope maintenance before being certified for combat operations, a requirement that proved both wise and insufficient for what lay ahead. The Marshall Islands, First Blood. The 4th Marine Division's assault on the Marshall Islands in early 1944 provided the Unertl system its first major combat test. Kwajalein and Majuro offered ideal conditions for precision optics, relatively dry climate, clear visibility, and defensive positions that favored long-range engagements over close-quarters jungle fighting. Mitchell's first combat experience with the Unertl scope came during the reduction of Japanese positions on Kwajalein's northern beaches. From a concealed position behind coral formations, he engaged enemy machine gun crews directing fire against advancing Marine infantry. The scope's 8-power magnification allowed precise target identification at distances where enemy personnel appeared as distinct individuals rather than anonymous figures. His first confirmed kill came at a measured distance of 820 yards, a shot that would have been utterly impossible with standard equipment. "Target was approximately 820 yards distant," Mitchell wrote in his official report, his prose matter-of-fact despite describing his first time killing another human being. Enemy machine gunner visible through cave opening, clear atmospheric conditions, light wind from east, first round impact observed through scope, target eliminated, no return fire received. The psychological impact of successful long-range engagements extended beyond immediate tactical advantages. Marines who'd previously felt outranged by Japanese snipers suddenly possessed capability to dominate the precision shooting environment. Enemy forces that had grown comfortable operating at what they considered safe distances found themselves vulnerable to American fire at ranges they'd never previously experienced. Initial combat reports from mid-1943 painted an encouraging picture of the system's battlefield effectiveness. Marine snipers operating on Tarawa reported successful engagements at ranges exceeding 800 yards, Japanese forces accustomed to operating outside American small arms range found themselves vulnerable at distances they'd considered tactically secure. But the Marshall Islands' relatively benign environmental conditions provided an incomplete and ultimately misleading test of the system's durability. Saipan, where precision meets reality. The assault on Saipan in June 1944 would prove everything the critics had warned about. Saipan's tropical humidity and the coral dust that characterized cave warfare would challenge every assumption about equipment reliability. The island's terrain, a nightmare combination of volcanic rock, dense jungle, and elaborate Japanese cave systems, created environmental conditions that seemed specifically designed to destroy delicate mechanisms. Within days of landing, reports began filtering back through division headquarters. The pattern was unmistakably grim. Mitchell's experience embodied the human cost of equipment failure under combat conditions. During savage fighting for Saipan's central highlands, his unearthly scope failed at precisely the moment when precision shooting capability was most critically needed. A Japanese sniper positioned in a cave complex had been systematically targeting Marine squad leaders, inflicting casualties that disrupted unit cohesion and slowed the advance through terrain that favored defensive operations. Mitchell identified the enemy position through patient observation, noting muzzle flashes that revealed the sniper's location approximately 400 yards across a valley filled with smoke and dust from ongoing artillery bombardment. 400 yards, well within the capabilities of his M1990-3A1 rifle, using iron sights under normal conditions, but the concealed nature of the target required optical magnification for precise shot placement through the narrow opening that provided the enemy sniper his only vulnerability. As Mitchell settled into his firing position behind volcanic rocks, the unearthly scope's objective lens fogged over completely. Humid tropical air condensed on the glass surface faster than it could evaporate in the oppressive heat. Attempts to clear the lens using approved cleaning procedures proved futile. Moisture continued accumulating, despite careful attention to maintenance protocols. The external adjustment knobs, coated with fine coral dust that had infiltrated every piece of equipment during weeks of cave warfare, refused to move despite application of the lubricants specified in technical manuals. Forced to engage using iron sights at a distance where precise shot placement was critical, Mitchell fired 3 carefully aimed rounds at the cave opening. The Japanese sniper responded immediately, his bullet striking Mitchell's protective cover and showering him with rock fragments before a second round found flesh, tearing through his left shoulder with devastating force. "This thing's more fragile than my grandmother's china," Mitchell transmitted bitterly to his company commander from an aid station. "Request permission to use standard rifle for remainder of operation." The words carried personal disappointment and tactical anger that transcended individual experience, representing collective disillusionment of Marines who'd trained extensively with equipment that proved unreliable when lives depended on it. The rejection. The after-action reports from Saipan arrived at Marine Corps headquarters like a succession of body blows, each document undermining confidence in equipment that had shown such promise under controlled conditions. The 1st Marine Division's assessment proved particularly damaging. M1990-3A1 unearthly sniper rifles proved ineffective due to environmental conditions and maintenance requirements exceeding field capabilities. Recommend immediate replacement with more robust alternatives. Similar reports followed from other units, painting a consistent picture of precision equipment failing under harsh realities of tropical combat operations. Colonel William Sterling's voice carried the weight of vindication as he reviewed mounting evidence during a heated equipment board meeting in late summer 1944. "Gentlemen, I warned against adopting civilian equipment for military use. These reports confirm that complicated mechanisms have no place in combat operations where reliability trumps theoretical performance advantages every single time." His words reflected institutional thinking that valued proven simplicity over innovative complexity, a conservative philosophy that seemed justified by battlefield experience that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Orders began circulating through Marine units in the Pacific, directing the phase-out of M1990-3A1 unearthly sniper rifles in favor of more robust alternatives. The decision reflected institutional priorities that valued consistent mediocrity over exceptional performance that came with unacceptable reliability risks. Marines who'd invested months learning the system's intricacies found themselves retraining with simpler equipment that offered fewer capabilities but greater durability under adverse conditions. John Unertl Sr. received the devastating news in his Pittsburgh workshop. For a man who'd devoted years to perfecting his craft, who'd worked 16-hour days modifying designs to address every documented failure, the rejection represented something beyond professional disappointment. It felt like personal failure. "I have let them down," he told Emma quietly one evening, his thick accent heavy with emotion. "The young Marines, they needed equipment that worked, and I gave them complicated mechanisms that failed in the field." Emma, ever practical, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You gave them equipment that worked better than anything they'd had before when conditions allowed. That's not failure, John. That's progress, interrupted by war's realities." But for John Unertl, it felt like failure nonetheless. Korea. The resurrection. The forgotten war began with forgotten equipment. When North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel in June 1950, the Marine Corps found itself desperately short of precision shooting capabilities. Years of post-war budget cuts had reduced sniper programs to skeletal training cadres. In warehouses across the continental United States, hundreds of M1903A1 rifles fitted with Unertl scopes sat in Cosmoline-coated storage, their wartime failures seemingly confirming institutional wisdom about the incompatibility of delicate civilian equipment with military requirements. The resurrection of the discredited system occurred not through deliberate policy decisions, but from practical necessity born of limited resources and urgent operational demands. Marine units deploying to Korea lacked sufficient modern sniper rifles to meet tactical requirements. Quartermaster depots scrambled to locate any available precision shooting equipment. Those forgotten, Unertl-equipped rifles, gathering dust in storage for 5 years, suddenly represented viable assets in an environment where beggars couldn't be choosers. Gunnery Sergeant Tom Chen, no relation to the Robert Chen who'd innovated protective techniques on Okinawa, though he'd heard the stories, received one of the resurrected rifles at Camp Pendleton before deploying with the 1st Marine Division. The rifle's serial number indicated manufacture in 1944. The Unertl scope showed signs of long storage, but remained optically sound. Chen, a Korean War Marine whose only knowledge of the system came from old training manuals and stories from Pacific veterans, approached the equipment with low expectations, shaped by warnings about fragility and maintenance requirements. Korea's climate, however, proved dramatically different from the Pacific's tropical humidity. The Chosin Reservoir campaign unfolded in conditions of brutal cold, temperatures plunging to 30 below zero, winds that could freeze exposed flesh in minutes, and snow that transformed the landscape into a white hell. These conditions challenged every piece of equipment, threatening to freeze firing mechanisms and crack wooden stocks, but they proved unexpectedly ideal for precision optics. The cold, dry air eliminated the humidity problems that had plagued the Unertl scopes in the Pacific. Dust and contamination became non-issues when everything was covered in snow and ice. The external adjustment mechanisms, so prone to seizing in tropical moisture, functioned flawlessly in the frozen clarity of Korean winter. Chen's first long-range engagement came during the fighting withdrawal from the Chosin Reservoir. Chinese forces had surrounded the Marine Division, attacking in human wave assaults that threatened to overwhelm American positions through sheer numerical superiority. From a defensive position overlooking a valley approach, Chen engaged Chinese officers directing troop movements at ranges that seemed impossible. 950 yards, 1,020 yards, distances where enemy personnel had considered themselves safely beyond American small arms range. Through the Unertl scope's crystal-clear optics, magnified targets appeared with perfect clarity against the snow-covered landscape. The cold, stable air eliminated heat shimmer that normally distorted long-range visibility. Chen's Kentucky windage calculations, accounting for the bitter wind sweeping down from Manchuria, proved devastatingly accurate. "Sir, "I've got confirmed kills at over 1,000 yards," Chen reported to his company commander, his own voice betraying disbelief at the distances involved. "This equipment, it's like nothing I've ever used. In these conditions, it's absolutely perfect." The reports from Korea painted a picture so dramatically different from Pacific Theater assessments that Marine Corps headquarters initially questioned their accuracy. But as more units deployed with the resurrected unearthly systems, and as more after-action reports documented extraordinary performance in Korea's cold, dry environment, the pattern became undeniable. The equipment hadn't failed in the Pacific because of inherent design flaws. It had failed because environmental conditions exceeded the tolerances for which civilian target shooting equipment had been designed. In Korea's frozen clarity, those same inadequate scopes performed exactly as John Unertl had originally envisioned. The legacy. John Unertl Sr. died in 1953, 3 years after Korea vindicated his life's work. He never knew that his failed scopes had found their perfect battlefield, that the equipment discarded as too fragile had proved devastatingly effective under the right conditions. Emma Unertl received a letter from the Marine Corps Commandant, expressing gratitude for her husband's contributions to American marksmanship capabilities. The letter mentioned Korea specifically, noting that Unertl-equipped rifles had achieved confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, distances that rewrote assumptions about effective rifle engagement ranges. "Your husband's genius," the letter stated, "lay not in creating equipment suited for all conditions, but in creating equipment that could exceed all expectations under the right conditions. In Korea, we finally found those conditions." The story of the Unertl scope teaches lessons that transcend optics and marksmanship. Innovation often fails not because ideas are flawed, but because circumstances don't yet exist for those ideas to flourish. Institutional resistance to change, while frustrating, serves important protective functions, preventing adoption of solutions whose limitations might prove catastrophic under field conditions. But perhaps most importantly, the Unertl saga reminds us that failure is rarely absolute or permanent. Equipment that proved inadequate in tropical humidity became devastatingly effective in frozen clarity. Designs rejected as too fragile found environments where fragility didn't matter, and precision proved decisive. Corporal James Mitchell survived his Saipan wound and lived until 2003. In his final years, he followed reports of modern military optical systems, night vision scopes, thermal imagers, laser rangefinders, with the keen interest of a man who'd witnessed the birth of precision military optics. "That Unertl scope," he told his grandson during a conversation about military service, "it was ahead of its time. We blamed it for failing us in the Pacific, but really we failed it by expecting civilian equipment to survive conditions nothing civilian was ever designed to endure. In Korea, when conditions matched the design parameters, that same inadequate equipment rewrote the book on long-range shooting." He paused, remembering coral dust and fogged lenses, and the bitter taste of equipment failure at critical moments. "But I'll tell you something else. Every modern military scope owes something to John Unertl's willingness to push boundaries, to create equipment that exceeded existing standards even if it came with limitations. Progress always comes with growing pains. The question is whether you're willing to endure those pains for the eventual payoff." Today, American military snipers routinely engage targets at distances that would have seemed impossible in 1941. Modern optics provide magnification, clarity, and durability that John Unertl could only dream about. But the philosophical foundation, that seeing farther enables fighting more effectively, that optical superiority provides tactical advantage, was laid by a German immigrant working 16-hour days in a Pittsburgh shop, grinding lenses by hand and refusing to accept that good enough was actually good enough. From Pearl Harbor's bitter lesson, that American forces couldn't see far enough to fight effectively, through the frustrating Pacific Theater failures that seemed to prove critics right, to Korea's frozen vindication that demonstrated the design's fundamental soundness. The Unertl scope. His story is ultimately about perseverance in the face of failure, innovation, despite institutional resistance, and the ultimate triumph of ideas whose time had finally come. The next time you hear about revolutionary equipment failing under field conditions, Remember the unearthly scope. Ask not whether the equipment failed, but whether the conditions matched the design parameters. Consider whether today's failure might become tomorrow's breakthrough when circumstances finally align with capabilities, because sometimes the difference between failure and success is not the design itself. It's finding the right battlefield where genius can finally demonstrate its full potential.